Have you ever seen an auto fail on a Class A CDL drive test? Well, pay attention, because here's one right now.
Game over.
Don't let this happen to you on your test day. Stay tuned for the 2 most common auto fails on your drive and how to avoid them. Okay, so you passed the first 2 sections of your CDL exam. First was that pre-trip vehicle inspection where we went through the entire vehicle and displayed that we understand how to evaluate that it's in good shape. And then second was that backing where we got onto that training pad and backed up the vehicle in a way to display some maneuvers that we know how to operate a combination vehicle in reverse. What's up next? That 3rd section. This is the drive section. Now, before we get into some of those avoidable auto fails that are going to help you ensure that you get through this test on the first try, let's talk a little bit about the drive section from a bird's eye view. What is it? How long does it take? What are we trying to accomplish? Let's talk about the drive section. The drive section should take between 25 and 35 minutes typically, where you'll be driving the vehicle with the examiner present, displaying that you know how to operate out in traffic, out in real space. Some of the things that you'll be seeing: left turns, right turns, intersections, railroad crossings, curves, upgrades, downgrades. Remember, you're heavy now, so that plays a significant role. Rural roads, semi-rural roads, city streets, multi-lane streets, expressway driving, multi-lane turns. These are turns where there's 2 different turn lanes and we have to make sure that we're in our widest lane, staying wide through it, and managing that off track. As we know, when we drive a combination vehicle, the trailer is always trying to take a shortcut to where the steers have been, i.e. that term off tracking. So we need to make sure that we're displaying good trailer control by watching the trailer and staying wide through the turn. So how are we scored on this test? Well, we are scored during our turns, during our merging, during our lane changes, and that we're displaying good speed control during the varying and different speed limits that are posted, showing that we are slowing and accelerating and keeping a nice speed through those climbs, through those descents. So speaking of scoring, what is the scoring structure on this drive test? Well, this is kind of an interesting subplot. This test was originally designed for a manual transmission, double clutching, being able to shift and turn, accelerate, not stall out, not impede traffic, all of that stuff with a manual transmission. And most of these tests are now done with automatic. So it's very, very difficult to point out. You can score 30 points and still pass your test, as it was designed for that manual transmission. So most of what we're trying to avoid on this test is these auto fails. So what is an auto fail and how do I get them? An auto fail is essentially doing something unsafe or illegal that displays a lack of competency or competence when operating a combination vehicle that stops the test. So what are the 2 most common that we end up seeing? Ticketable offenses and preventable accidents. So what do we mean by these? Let's get a little bit further into those. Okay, so ticketable offenses is something you should be pretty familiar with already. This is stuff like speeding, running a red light, stuff you've been avoiding as you're daily operating in a personal vehicle. But we want to definitely apply that to our CDL test as well. It's also important to keep in mind that speed is not just about going too fast, but it can be about going too slow. We've all seen those posted speed limit max and minimums on the highway. If you're going significantly slower than 40 out on the highway and other vehicles are going 70, you're the one that's being unsafe. You got to keep in mind the safest speed is typically the speed of traffic, so we're not an impediment to those other operators out in the road, personal vehicles or commercial vehicles like ourselves. So keep in mind that your speed can be too fast, but it can also be too slow. And that second thing we're talking about here is those preventable accidents, something generally referred to as impeding, which is just really a fancy way of saying that you pulled out in front of someone. So these right here are the three most common of the preventable accidents we're gonna see. And before we get into how to avoid those, let's take a look at some of those out in the field to see what that looks like when we are in a situation where we need to make sure and get that 10-second window in. We are watching that traffic clear from the off-ramp to our right, and as it does, the traffic in front of us gets the green light and begins to move forward. As we are watching that traffic, we are watching the horizon for a 10-second window so that when we have it, we can go confidently. And remember, it's better to wait for 2 minutes right here than for 2 days to test again because we accidentally pulled out in front of someone and committed that auto fail. So once we have it here, that light is turned red and we have a green arrow. We move ourselves into the intersection, making sure our trailer gets at least 5 foot from where we could off-track anything before we start our turn. Stay wide, watch the inside, and continue onto the highway. So there we saw that left turn with traffic coming towards us and making sure that we got enough of a space in order to continue. In that situation, the light turned to a green arrow for us. And when you have that green arrow, that is the right of way. It means the oncoming traffic has a red light. So that gave us our 10-second window. The next one we're going to look at here is that right turn where we have potential traffic coming from across the street and down the street to the left. So let's take a look at that. We're making our way up the off-ramp here, staying wide to the left for this turn to the right, and stopping completely at our merge point here. We need to verify a 10-second window, nothing coming from the street down the left or across the street turning left. And in this particular turn, we're gonna need both of those lanes to keep that back right trailer tire from off-tracking into the curb. So I'm looking for both lanes to be cleared for a 10-second window. Once I have it, I continue out borrowing a little bit of that internal lane to watch the off track, staying wide, watching inside right convex. And once my trailer's back in the lane, I get back in front of it. Okay, so there we saw a good example of that right turn with a merge lane. We stopped at our merge point to evaluate to make sure no one was coming from the left down the street in either of those two lanes because we need to borrow a little bit of that internal lane for the combination vehicles off track. And we also wanted to look across the street and make sure no one was turning left from that position either. Now in this particular example, that lane across the street was an on-ramp for the highway, but we still want to have that general practice of evaluating to make sure nothing is coming from across the street as well. So that third one we're going to talk about is something you do all the time and just kind of take for granted. It's a lane change to the left or to the right. The difference in this particular vehicle is we happen to be very long, 70 foot plus at times. So we need to make sure that we have, again, that 10-second window before we move laterally. So we can see an example of that right here. So right here, we are looking to do a lane change to the right. We have got our signal on, we look into our side and our convex and our hood mirror to verify that 10-second window. And once we have it, we move laterally in a slow and controlled fashion, verifying the trailers in the lane before we then cancel our signal. Slow and controlled is the best way to do those lane changes. So there we have an example of the three most common preventable accidents, i.e. impeding, that we're going to see. Now, it's great to know about what these are, but how do we prevent them? That might be the more important part of this story. So let's talk about prevention of these auto fails. Okay, so let's just go through them in order. The first thing that we want to prevent is running a red light. Now, the way to approach this is have a plan. You know, it's one of my favorite things to say. As you're approaching a light, think of a point of no return that's anywhere from 25 to 50 to 75 foot prior to that light, where you've already decided if it turns yellow after that point, you're going to safely continue, or if it turns yellow prior to that point, you're going to safely come to a stop. That way we've already had it in our mind what we're going to do as we approach, and we don't become reactive, but we are being proactive to avoid that red light. Now, the next auto fail we want to avoid is speeding, and this is a pretty easy one as long as we're doing a good job monitoring our mirrors, our horizon, and our speedometer on a cycle. Always keep an eye on that speedometer, and when you look at that speedometer, have a target speed that you're focusing on. Now, most tests will not get shut down for going as much as 10 over. That's typically the point where they'll shut down your test for excessive speed. So you can go a couple miles per hour over, but we want to have a general idea when we're looking at that speedometer of what the posted limit is and what our target is in that posted limit. I tell students target between 5 under or what the speed limit is. That way, if it does creep up a little bit, it doesn't get away from us. So that's a great strategy. Have a target window and keep an eye on your speedometer. Now, next up is something called the preventable accident, i.e. the impeding. And this is the one we see the most frequently, so we want to make sure that we take a second here, think about it, develop a strategy to avoid it. Now, if you've worked with me before, you've heard me say the 10-second window at length. This is the holy grail of how to keep ourselves from that auto fail on our test day. Make sure that you have a 10-second window. So the 10-second window is the idea that we're 70 foot long, we're slow, we're heavy. It takes a while to get through these turns. So we need to make sure we have ample time and space to get through these turns without slowing down traffic or causing anyone to have to significantly alter their path. So that's why we need the 10-second window. Let's talk about how it applies to each one of these different auto fails. Okay, so first up is going to be that left turn crossing traffic. We want to make sure we stop before we enter the intersection, verify a 10-second window, and when we are 100% confident we have that 10-second window, we go confidently. We don't want to dally through that intersection because we don't want a 10-second window to suddenly become a 15 or 20-second window and accidentally impede. So make sure that when you have that 10-second window, you go confidently. Now that second one, we're going to turn right, stopping at our merge point or yielding briefly to make sure we have that 10-second window before safely continuing. And again, we're looking for traffic coming from down the street to the left from both of those lanes and across the street, turning left to make sure that we have that 10-second window. And again, once we have it, we go confidently. Get 100% confident and go confidently. And that final one, that lane change, again, we get our signal on, we crowd that line so we let folks know we want that space, we don't encroach, but we crowd it, and then we wait for our 10-second window by checking our side, convex, and hood mirror. We have 3 mirrors on both sides of the vehicle. We need to check all 3 to verify our 10-second window. And again, when we have it, we go confidently. We don't want to be passive out there. That can cause accidents. So if you have a 10-second window, go confidently. Enter the lane in a controlled fashion. Cancel your signal when the trailer's behind you. Okay, so there we have it. We've broken down some of the specific auto fails and come up with some strategies on how to avoid them. But when we zoom out a little bit, let's talk about how to approach this test. Now, there are 3 main things I want you guys thinking about. First of all, have a strategy for these hot zone areas that we're discussing. When you go into these, think about your plan and make sure you're following that plan. Remember, it's better to be proactive than reactive. Number 2, I want you guys to think about vocalizing your plan. When you vocalize stuff, when you talk while you're testing, the examiner is paying attention and he knows that you have a plan, that you're being thoughtful about how you're interacting with the space and the combination vehicle. And maybe more importantly, it creates a confidence for you because you're not distracted. You're focused on the task at hand. That third one is confidence. Remember that you are in a leadership position out here. Personal vehicles look to you to make the professional decisions, and that requires smart and decisive driving. So how do we ensure that we get and build this confidence? Well, a great way that I found is to do visualizations. You've heard me talk about this with your maneuvers. This is something that puts us in a position to explore scenarios that we haven't yet experienced in order to develop a strategy or a plan. So while you're out driving over the road, think about scenarios that could occur and develop a strategy for those. So that way, if something does occur, you have some sort of built idea of how you would respond to that. These maneuver visualizations are great for helping you to establish and build a plan and start to build confidence for how to operate that vehicle out in the real world. Okay, there we have it, a video on our drive section and specifically the most common auto fails with some strategies on how to avoid them, because I want you guys to pass your test on the very first try. So feel free to reach out to me directly, comment below. If you're curious about driving for Prime, hit me up, I'm the guy to see, and share this video to anybody that you think could use a little adventure in your life. I only planned on being out here a year, and here I am 7 years later, loving every minute of it. So drive safe, drive smart, hit me up. Until next time, guys. I'm not keeping, is that 10-second window? Intersections, railway